reached for his gun, that he ignored commands to drop his gun, ignored at least 10 commands to drop his gun. The DA said that Scott took a deep breath, then exited his vehicle with his gun in his hand and stepped back and assessed the officers. The DA says that Mr. Scott actually looked at Officer Vincent, then looked at the other officers, then looked back at Vincent. At that point, according to the DA, Vincent said he thought he was in imminent danger of being shot, so he fired 4 shots at Kieth Lamont Scott. 3 of those shots actually hit Scott. So that was really the bottom line from the DA, that the officer felt he was in imminent danger. Now, to the claims by Scott's family that Mr. Scott did not have a gun, the DA said that is unequivocally not the case, that they showed video evidence showing that he had a gun in a holster on his ankle as he entered a convenience store just minutes before the shooting, and that another piece of video shows that he had a holster on his right ankle just moments before the shooting. Also, to the claims by some that the white officers on the scene shot Kieth Lamont Scott, the DA said every piece of evidence they have shows that is not the case, that only 4 shots were fired at Kieth Scott, and that all 4 of those bullet casings came from Officer Vincent's gun. Now, I asked the DA, did Kieth Scott ever raise his gun toward the officer? And the DA said he did not. From everything that they've gotten, every indication they've gotten from the officers on the scene, that he did not actually raise his hand, but he said that nonetheless, Officer Vincent felt that he was in imminent danger, and he said he had to fire those shots, Brianna.
It was a really good question that you asked, Brian. I thought that really gave some clarity to what the district attorney was thinking. And then Laura Coates, we then heard the DA talk about reaction time, that actually for Scott to have lifted, if he were to, lifted his hand and point the weapon at the officer, that research shows that at best it would be a tie. So that he was trying to make the point that the officer was very much at risk. I know that you see some issue with that.
Well, that is an issue, not because it undermines the DA's ultimate conclusion, but all of this is done in real time. When an officer is presented with a threat, if it may be lethal threat or otherwise, they have to, in real time, make decisions. Now, the fact they're able to use documented evidence or statistics to talk about reaction time may or may not have been a factor in this officer's decision to actually shoot Mr. Kieth Lamont Scott. The issue is not whether statistics show it was reasonable, it's whether in real time he was reasonable. And, I have to say, based on what the DA did lay out, objectively speaking, based on what he said was true, and if it in fact was true, the officer may have in fact perceived a reasonable threat. Not simply because he had his arm down to his side and there was a gun that we seemed to be, there was a gun in the actual picture, but because he failed to obey an order to drop that weapon, and that contributed to the officer's perception of lethal force.
Let's listen to the DA talking about Scott's gun.
Mr. Scott's gun, a Colt .380 semi-automatic, was recovered at the scene. It had 1 round in the chamber, the safety was off, and the gun was cocked. Mr. Scott has maintained in interviews with investigators and the media that Mr. Scott did not have a gun.
That is something that stood out to me, that you had family members, you had witnesses who insisted that he actually had a book, and they say there was no book. We found no book in the front seat, we found a book in the back seat, and furthermore, the DA talks about a number of people giving accounts to cameras and then saying to law enforcement, actually, you know what, I wasn't there, I didn't see it.
Right, and what you have now, remember we had the excruciating audio footage from the wife who's saying he doesn't have a gun, he has a TBI. And then you have these sort of statements being undermined by people in the community who speak one way in front of the media and in social media as well, and then before an FBI agent have a very different story. And when you have this inconclusive, and I mean an absence of video footage showing his hand or a weapon in his hand, all you're left with is a battle between the credibility of the officers on the scene and people who are saying they're eyewitnesses. And when the eyewitnesses turned out to have given false narratives, I don't want to call it a lie, but perhaps a false narrative, and you have 3 officers at least.
But if they're saying they saw something that they didn't see.
Well,
okay.
False.
All right. I'll let you go with that.
For a second. But, you have this battle of this credibility, and who's going to win? An officer is going to be deemed more credible than somebody who's promoting a lie of some sort. And so when you have that inconclusive data, all the prosecutor has to do is now rely on the officers. And what I did like about what the DA said, Brown, which most people have not been pointing out, is the fact that he was trying to not only dismantle this theory that they were going to be lax in their investigation, but also there was a lot of racial baiting that was going on throughout the course of the coverage when it first happened, because people were saying it was a white officer, et cetera.
And they believe it was solely the black officer.
It was solely the black officer, and that officer came forward as saying it was him. So they were trying to not only do an effective analysis of the investigation and of what happened, but also to try to alleviate concern.
Yeah, well, they're bracing to see the after effects of this. Laura Coates, thank you so much. Thank you to Brian Todd as well. And coming up, decision